Rishad Premji. He is currently the Executive Chairman of WIPRO Limited. He was earlier the Chief Strategy Officer responsible for shaping WIPRO's strategy to drive sustained and profitable growth.
Unmute.
As the Chief Strategy Officer, he led WIPRO's mergers and acquisition strategy and conceptualized WIPRO Ventures, a $250 million fund to invest in startups developing technologies and solutions that will complement WIPRO's business with next generation service and products. Rishad is on the board of WIPRO Enterprises Limited, a leading player in FMCG and infrastructure engineering, and WIPRO GE, a joint venture between WIPRO and General Electric in the healthcare domain. Prior to joining WIPRO in 2007, Rishad has an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BA in economics from Wesleyan University in the US. In 2014, he was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum for his outstanding leadership, professional accomplishment, and commitment to society. He is also on the board of the Azim Premji Foundation, one of the largest not-for-profit initiatives in India. The foundation, which is focused on improving public school education, works with over 350,000 government schools across 7 states in India. Separately, he is also on the board of Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiatives, which provides grants to organizations that contribute to social change. During the financial year 2018-19, Rishad was the chairman of NASSCOM, the trade body of India's 190 billion software industry. Rishad and his wife, Aditi, have 2 children. He enjoying traveling, movies, and a huge cricket fan. We are extremely excited to hear more about his journey and how he foresees the tech industry playing a vital role in India's growth in the coming years. I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Archana Vijaya, known for her straight questions. I'm sure this will bring a thrilling session. Now I would like to hand it over to our National President of FICCI Flow, Ms. Ujjwala Singhania, to give her welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. Namaste. And a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this session today. Warren Buffett has very rightly said that digital transformation is a fundamental reality for businesses today. India's information technology sector has been playing a key role in boosting the country's business ecosystem. Today, we have with us Mr. Rishad Premji, Chairman of WIPRO, a visionary leader and a doyen of Indian tech industry. He is one of the most renowned young global leader recognized for his outstanding professional achievements, leadership, and commitment towards the society. Mr. Premji, it's my absolute honor to welcome you as the 38th National President of FLOW. FLOW is one of the oldest business chambers for women in South Asia, with over 8,000 members across 80 chapters pan-India. This year, my focus is on empowering women by facilitating an enabling environment that promotes entrepreneurship, industry participation, and economic development of women. I must also congratulate you as WIPRO completes 75 years of a spectacular journey. Started by Mr. M.H. Premji in 1945, WIPRO has come a long way, emerging as one of India's most esteemed companies, spanning across consumer care, IT, automation, and infrastructure engineering. One of Rishad's recent interviews, he had said that IT companies will now collaborate with the startup ecosystem to lead the next wave of technology growth. This is perhaps the need of the hour. It will be very interesting to hear from you on how technology and innovation is a way forward to COVID-19 recovery. Thank you once again for addressing us today. As a token of our appreciation and gratitude, we would like to present you a virtual memento and a green certificate. We also like to present a green certificate for Archana. May I request the IT team to share it on the screen? I would now like to request Archana to take the session forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Singhania. Thank you for that wonderful token. 2 bountiful trees being planted in my name. I'm extremely proud of that, and I hope that Fiki Flow continues to do all the good work that you're doing. Now, as an entrepreneur myself, I'm extremely eager to understand from Mr. Premji on how businesses can recover post the pandemic and how technology can help amplify that process. As you all know, Mr. Premji is the executive chairman of WIPRO Limited, amongst a host of other responsibilities that have been so well defined by Mrs. Kanoria and Mrs. Singhania. And hence, he's an extremely busy man, so I'm going to get right to it. Firstly, thank you so much, Mr. Premji, for taking the time out for this discussion today. And I hope it's going to be insightful for all of us.
Thank you for having me, and please, Archana, call me Rishad, because every time somebody calls me Mr. Premji, I feel much older, and B, I look around my shoulder because nobody calls me Mr. Premji. So please call me Rishad.
Right, we're going to go with Rishad then. Okay, Rishad, let's first, off the bat, let's begin with the fact that technology, obviously, which is the topic of conversation today, has proven to be disruptive across industries. What do you think of India's future in the post-pandemic environment? Can you suggest 3 things a company should adopt in order to adapt to the new normal?
Actually, that's a very broad question and a big question, but let me just start by perhaps sharing a few things that I think have profoundly changed in the last 12, 18 months as far as technology is concerned, right? One is, I don't know how much we all appreciate, but technology at some level has lessened the challenge of the pandemic, right? It's allowed us to be more connected. It's allowed us to sort of stay in touch with people. It's allowed us to access information. It's allowed us to access things that we need. So technology, I believe, has definitely simplified or lessened the pain that we have all experienced, right? The second, I think, profound change is that the ways of working have changed forever. The reality is that the world was already getting, and India certainly was also getting to be more remote, more virtual, more global, more distributed in the way people engaged. But the pandemic has sort of hastened this, right? The reality is, if I just look at the technology industry, the IT services industry, where roughly 4.5 million people are directly employed, 4.5 million people were coming into work in the early part of March, and a week later, 95% of those were working from home. Mm-hmm. Nobody had tested a model of this scale and complexity ever. You never have business continuity planning at that scale, right? But the reality is the model works, the model is real and likely here to stay. And we can talk about that a little bit as we move forward as well. The reality also is that new age technologies are fundamentally changing the way we engage, and businesses are changing the way we engage. So for example, a restaurant is no longer a true restaurant, but an app is the storefront of a restaurant, right? I learned to use Swiggy in the pandemic, and I frankly never ordered online before, right? Or if you look at retailers, and curbside pickups are becoming a reality in other parts of the world. So business models are fundamentally changing because of the advancement of technology and because of the change that we see happening in the pandemic. And then the other huge advantage we have is new age technologies are also enabling us to drive these businesses much better, right? So how do we drive significantly better hyper-personalization, for example, in the way we engage with our stakeholders? How do we drive much closer collaboration with stakeholders that sit in all parts of the world to bring better offerings and better products to our customers? So I'm a huge believer that technology is fundamentally changed our thinking and our mindset, which is oftentimes the first change agent to what technology can actually do. So mindset changes have been forced upon us, which I think is very, very powerful. The biggest challenge for us will be, how do we build up and live up to this opportunity? And I think the biggest challenge, and we can talk about that a little bit more, will be talent and the availability of talent as technology becomes all pervasive and all real as we move forward.
And you just mentioned definitely technology has made our lives easier. Like you said, it's lessened the sort of burden that the pandemic has actually brought upon us. But also there's a big debate now amongst people. Is work from home better or is going to the office better? What is better for you?
Archana, so it's very interesting. One is, the future of work is going to be a hybrid model. I'm convinced of that. It's going to be some model where people work partially from home and partially from the office, right? The other reality that is dawning, at least that I'm learning and we are all learning, is that people's preference not to come back to the office is also growing. So it's remarkable how many people actually prefer to work from home. And I don't believe people are working less hard. In fact, oftentimes I feel people are working harder because the separation of your personal and professional life is actually getting blurred. So drawing lines is going to be more and more important in this future of work model where you're working partially from home and not from home. I am of the strong view that people should come back to the office in some shape and form, right? And I think working together with people is important for a bunch of different reasons. One, I think it's deeply, deeply important for culture. Yes. Because culture grows when people get together. Culture grows when you gossip about what's happening in the office over the water cooler or over a cup of coffee. So I think for the growth of culture, it's incredibly important, right? Our challenge today as a company is we have over 50,000 new people that have joined us in the last 14 months, right? Net 15,000, but grows 50,000 new people. And 50,000 new people have never walked into an office, have never met their colleagues in person. We've been through a CEO transition where our CEO, who's based in Paris, has actually never met most of his direct reports and most of his team in person ever, right? So it's a fundamental change. And I think for culture to grow, people getting together is incredibly, incredibly important, right? The other thing I think it's very important for is for just ideation and innovation. Because for me, innovation doesn't happen in a very structured, linear manner. It happens in very
in terms of communication, right? Also in terms of communication, you need to be sometimes sitting in front of each other to be able to communicate, create, ideate together.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly, the challenge of this medium, Arjuna, is it's transactional. It's effective, but it's transactional. There's no informal banter. I can't see you. I can't sense your body language. I can't sense your comfort or discomfort with me with this session, which I can if I was with you in person. So I think those kinds of things are incredibly important. So we are very keen that people come back in some shape and form, at least some of the time. So all of our people will come back some of the time, but all of our people won't come back all of the time. And in fact, we're just going to experiment starting in September, where we're going to have our senior leaders coming back twice a week. And we'll see how that goes for the next few weeks, and then again evaluate on a constant going basis. So the other reality of the change is experimentation has to be very high. The ability to fail and learn faster is going to be very high. So we'll try this for a few weeks. Maybe we'll try it for 6-8 weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll try something different. We're not going to stick with models for the next 6-9 months because we don't know how things are going to evolve. But the future of work is going to change, and it's going to be some form of a hybrid model, at least for industries like ours.
So definitely notes to be taken by everybody, all the entrepreneurs, all the women that are actually part of our audience. As Rishad's very rightfully saying, there needs to be a constant adaptation to our new normal, and of course, be also less averse to change. All right. And recently you also tweeted, the best bonus you could get is doing a job you love and working with people you like. What prompted you to say that?
No, I say lots of things on Twitter that come randomly to my mind, so I don't overthink some of these things. But look, Arjun, I'm a huge believer that you have to have fun when you work. If you're going to spend 12, 10, 12 hours of your life every day, 5 days a week, you have to have fun, right? And I remember I had a professor at business school once where he said to me, he said, if you have one friend at work, the likelihood of you staying on goes up by 30%.
Wow.
If that friend happens to be your boss, the likelihood of you staying on goes up by 70%, right? So you've got to be friends with people you work with. You've got to care about people more than just their output. You've got to care about people. And so for me, if you get to work and do something you love and you get to work with people you like, there can't be a better combination than that. And people oftentimes say people move for compensation, and certainly people move for compensation as well. But I think a lot of people balance the move for compensation with the kind of environment that you create, that creates something that where you can be yourself, you can share your ideas, you have safe spaces to communicate what you feel and think, and you actually like it. You like the organization and what it stands for, and you like the people you work with.
And just be able to grow and be yourself, like you mentioned. Now, also recently, India just celebrated its 75th Independence Day. And coincidentally, as Mrs. Singhania pointed out, WIPRO started off in 1945, actually, so more than 75 years. And you speak on that day, you spoke about the importance of continuously learning and upskill to new technologies and capabilities, as that is where the world is headed. Can you please elaborate on that for us?
Yeah. So Archana, I'm a big believer. When I look at people and I look at people that should join teams and join WIPRO, I look for two things. One is I look for a sense of a mindset of team and collaboration. And the other thing I look very strongly for is learnability, right? Because the reality is the world is changing so fast around us. What is relevant yesterday may not be relevant tomorrow. And so this mindset to be open to change and to learning new things and equally to unlearning what you have. The harder thing for many of us who've been doing doing a job in a certain way for many, many years, the hardest thing is letting go of that, try and do something different. So it's just a sort of a public acknowledgement of thinking to oneself and committing to oneself that one is just open to ideas, open to new things, open to new ways of thinking, and to be disrupted in one's own sort of ideals by just constantly being open to learning.
Correct.
And then more specifically for the technology industry, I think it's even more important that people sort of think continuously about new skills, new capabilities, new technologies, right? The challenge oftentimes in large organizations or even small ones is you'll have three sets of people. You'll have a bunch of people who will say, look, this too shall pass, and we're not going to join this. This is another phase. The world, the industry, the company is going through it, and it'll pass. The second phase of people are people who are leading the bus, who are driving the bus, who sort of know and are taking it forward. But it's the 80% of people who want to be on that bus but don't know how to get onto it. And those are the folks that you've got to think about. Those are the folks that you've got to help. Those are the folks that you've got to enable. And so learning and the openness to learning, I think, is a key ingredient to help those 80% of people get on the bus.
Yes, absolutely. And, interestingly, I also read that WIPRO has been named among the world's most ethical companies 2021 by the Ethisphere Institute for the 10th successive year. What essentially do you think is the ethos of the company in a nutshell?
It's tough. So Archana, one is we believe very strongly that organizations, small or big, have to have a sense of purpose. They've got to stand for something beyond just shareholder return and making profits. Right? You've got to be a responsible citizen to certainly your customers, but also to your employees and also to the communities in which you live and breathe. Right. So that's been a very strong foundational thinking in our company, and we really formally articulated our values from 1971. So this is our 50th year of articulating our values. It started off being called the WIPRO beliefs. Today it's called the spirit of WIPRO. Any office you walk into, any conference room you walk into, you'll see that. And that's the foundation, the absolute foundation of the company, right? What we stand for and what is black and white in the organization. And certainly integrity and values is integrity as a core part of values is just foundational in that. But the other thing that I'm also very excited about, which at least I'm spending a lot of my personal time over the last 16, 18 months, has been on what we call the 5 habits, which are just ways of working. So at WIPRO, the 5 habits are being respectful, being responsive, always communicating with people, demonstrating stewardship, which means putting the company first before your business unit, before your team, and then building trust. And I'm a big believer that ways of working, your behaviors every day that you bring into the office define the organization, right? Because people don't experience your values, my values, they experience our behaviors. And as a consequence, they determine whether you live your values or not. So for example, we say being respectful is a value, but being respectful is also a behavior. So we can say we're respectful as an organization, but if you come into the office and are abrasive, rude, dismissive, don't listen to people, are not inclusive of people, use foul language, then you're not demonstrating respect. So you can say you're respectful, but you're not living respect, right? So how do we fundamentally change our ways of working? And so I spend a lot of my time on that, because I've come to believe deeply that culture matters much, much, much more than strategy. Culture, the smell of the place, the kind of environment you create is incredibly important for an organization, especially if you want to be a going concern. And I would encourage, especially people here who are young in their entrepreneurial journey, to think very deeply about that, because it really defines the muscle of the organization in the long term, because there'll be ebbs and flows in your business. But if you have a strong foundation of the way you live and think, I think it's incredibly powerful.
Which brings me to my next question, which is, what kind of businesses is WIPRO Ventures looking to invest in, keeping all of these things in mind?
Yeah, so WIPRO Ventures is actually, is a subset of WIPRO. It's a core part of WIPRO. It's a corporate venture fund, which we set up about 5 or 6 years ago. The objective very simply was, how do we find a systematic and structured way of engaging with young companies, right? Because the reality is that all innovation is not happening at speed in large companies. Oftentimes it's happening in smaller companies. Right. And how can you find a way of leveraging and participating in those capabilities? And our initial learning, Archana, was that, young companies were afraid to work with big companies because they thought, hey, look, here comes the big guy who'll just take all the good stuff we have and dump us. There's a mismatch in the power equation between a big company and a small company. And so we said to ourselves, how can we invest in these companies to give them comfort? Hey, look, that our interests are aligned, that we win if you win, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started working with young companies and initially invested just to address this pain point of trust between young companies and bigger companies. And then we formalized it over the last 5 years. So we started off as a $100 million fund. We realized we were gaining good traction. We were able to leverage smart young companies and bring those capabilities into solutions we take to customers. We've now expanded that. And it's really giving us a ringside view of what's happening on the cutting edge of technology. It's also very humbling and a huge learning experience for us, because young companies can move at a speed that is just unimaginable for a large company, right? And speed is going to be a differentiator in this new world. So how can we learn from young companies? So it's a very exciting effort at the company. We are working with young companies. Our focus today is largely in the US and in Israel, but our focus is expanding. India is obviously going to be a very core market to work with young companies, especially as enterprise software, which is our area of business, becomes more and more pervasive in India. A large chunk of our early venture story in India has been largely consumer-centric as opposed to enterprise-centric, but that's changing very, very dramatically.
So we have a lot of women entrepreneurs who are obviously watching. They have businesses, big and small, including myself. So as an employer, you have more than 200,000 employees worldwide. What advice would you give people in terms of people management post the pandemic?
Yeah, a couple of things, Archana. One is, I would say it's very important to communicate, to over-communicate with people, right? People just need to be reached out to and sort of have a sense of what's going on in the organization. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic last year, we started connecting weekly. The leadership team, the top 25 people in the company connected weekly, which we had never done in a structured manner, just to exchange what was going on in the organization, just to sort of reach out and check if people were doing okay, encourage them to reach out to their teams and check if they were doing okay. So the one biggest thing I would say is reach out to your people and connect with them agenda-less, right? Connect with them just to reach out and see how they're doing, how their family is doing. Build a strong sense of connect with people, because people want that in these times of uncertainty which still exist. There's no such thing in my mind as over-communicating. You can never communicate enough, especially in a larger organization. So I would strongly encourage people to connect. The second thing is trusting people, right? I will tell you, as a company, till 18 months ago, we had people swipe in, swipe out. What time do they come into the office? What time are they leaving the office? We do none of that. People are working from home. We are trusting people. We are starting from a place of trust, believing people have the right intent, right? And the challenge is you oftentimes make rules for the exception. The reality is 95% of your people follow rules. And yet you have rules for those 95% who follow it rather than dealing with the 5% who don't, right? So how do you start from a place of trust and believe deeply in trust? And I think it's incredibly important in this time. I'm a huge believer that if you trust people, people rise to the occasion of trust. And if you start from a premise of mistrust, people react to that and people behave that, hey, look, anyway, I'm not valued or not trusted, so who cares? So I would say those are the two things I have learned, at least in the pandemic: over communication and starting from a place of trust with people.
Well, WIPRO as a company for over 75 years really epitomizes trust. And you're on the board of the Premji Foundation. It is one of the largest non-for-profit initiatives in India, perhaps the world. Can you tell us about how important it is for any business to give back, no matter how big or small they are? And especially now, since we've been through an unprecedented pandemic, how important is it for companies to actually give back, like give CSR the right?
So Archana, one is, I think it's very powerful as even as young entrepreneurs to start with the philosophy of a sense of community, right? You exist in an ecosystem, you benefit from that ecosystem. And so your responsibility is to multiple stakeholders, not only your customers and your shareholders, but your employees and certainly your communities. And that's a very strong ethos at WIPRO, right? So we have two different and distinct efforts. One is the WIPRO Foundation, which is the WIPRO CSR efforts, which is largely focused in the communities in which we live and exist as WIPRO. So a lot of our focus is urban and city-centric. A lot of our work is in things like around education, around working in schools, in urban settings that we are present as a company. A lot of focus around health, a lot of focus around disaster relief, and then a lot of focus around skilling, especially overseas, where a large chunk of our business comes from markets outside the country. The other effort is the effort of the Premji Foundation, which is a large shareholder of it. It's the largest shareholder of WIPRO. So 67% of the economic interest of WIPRO is owned by the foundation. So 67 cents or 67 paise of every rupee we make goes to a good cause. It matters to me. It matters to tremendous stakeholders. It matters to customers. It matters to many of our employees who join us. And the focus of the foundation is largely focused, I would say, 2 or 3 big prongs. One is on education, working in the villages of India, working at a primary school level, working with the government system, right? So we work today in 7 states. We work with over 350,000 schools, working with the machinery of the government system, because that is the largest scaled machinery today that exists. The beauty of India is today you have a school within a 1 to 2 kilometer walking radius of every child in the country. The challenge is how impactfully do those schools work. And our biggest learning over the last 20 years at being at this has been that the capability of the teacher is the most impactful thing for a child. So it's not technology and throwing technology in rural India. It is the capacity of the teacher. It is the ability of the teacher to engage with the child and teach the child. So for example, how do you measure if you teach a child self-confidence? It's hugely important. It's not teaching them English or not teaching them literacy or numeracy, but it's a huge skill in life. So the interaction with the teacher. So a lot of our focus is ground level, grassroots in the villages of India. The second thing we've done is set up a university. And the objective of the university is how do you build educators in the space of development and education more broadly. So, today we have about 850 people doing master's programs, about 500 people doing undergraduate programs. So we're graduating about 1,300 to 1,500 students every year, but focus in the development space. So the ethos of the university is, again, development centric and works very closely with the field. And then the last effort is around grant making. How do you support organizations that are doing great work and how can you accelerate that? So we just support NGOs. In the education space, we are an operating entity. Here we are a grant making entity. So we work with vulnerable groups, people with disabilities, domestic violence, adolescent girls, small and marginal farmers, those kinds of things. And so that's been the philosophical approach, Archana, of the foundation. But over the last 16 months, all of that has been thrown on its head, right? Because the reality was when COVID hit, our philosophy was this is going to be the largest crisis that we've seen in our lifetime. And so all the efforts of education at some fundamental level were put on hold, and all the stakeholders across these different organizations, their efforts were driven around helping on COVID, both on the humanitarian side as well as on the healthcare side. And now we're focused on vaccination in the poorest districts of India. So, as a foundation, we've committed over 2,000 crores now just on COVID, working and leveraging these ecosystems that exist on the ground. So it's a very hands-on operational approach, but it's been incredibly rewarding and incredibly necessary. And so that's what we've been doing at the foundation. And it's a core part of our philosophy at the company.
I'm sure there's a whole fulfilling aspect to all of this, which makes all of it make sense at the end of the day. Now, during the pandemic, we've even seen, obviously, a massive amount of loss of jobs, but there's also been, on the positive, a surge of women stepping up to the plate and starting home businesses, be it catering, creating clothes, little knickknacks, whatever it is, but that's a home business. So as obviously an extremely successful entrepreneur, what would you say to them who are just starting off from the house? How would they actually go about making a real business out of it? Maybe 3 tips.
Yeah, so Archana, I'm not, I've not started something from scratch. So they are probably much better off explaining to me what the challenges of starting a business from scratch are. But I'll say a couple of things that I've learned that I think have served us well. One is a deep customer obsession, right? A deep commitment to creating wonderful customer experiences. I think that's the fundamental, in my mind, success model of surviving as a business, an obsession with the customer to serve them delightfully and not cut corners, I think is incredibly powerful. And the second thing I would say is my personal learning has been you surround, even if you're a small business starting off and you have a few people working with you, is to surround yourself with the best people you can find. Right? I'm a huge believer that one A or A+ person is the equivalent of 5 Bs. And I'm a huge believer that you've got to focus on surrounding yourself with people who are infinitely better than you. They're better than you. They should have your job. And how do you keep those people engaged, even in a small business, to work for you and give them the freedom to grow, but have the self-confidence to attract people who are much better than you? And that's the challenge of, I think, starting a new business, the challenge of leadership as well. So great people, customer obsession.
Well, that's it. Well, I've asked a lot of the questions that were on my mind. I'm sure they were on the minds of our audience that has joined us. Thank you, firstly, the audience, for being so wonderful, joining us on this lovely, lovely conversation that we're having. Now, of course, I'd like Mrs. Ujjwala Singhania, National President, to actually come forward. She has a few questions, and I'm sure she's eager to ask them. So, Ujjwala, it's over to you.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you for such valuable inputs. We are celebrating 75 years of independence of India. WIPRO has completed 75 years on December 29. Could you please share this amazing journey with us?
The amazing journey of WIPRO. The story of WIPRO one is we're very proud that we're older than the independence of India, that we've survived this long and been able to sort of thrive on a strong set of values. I'll take a minute to share the story because I think it's an interesting one. We began we made cooking fat, so vanaspati ghee effectively, and that's how we began in 1946, in late 1945, early 1946, and that was the source of business for the company for the longest time. And I know in the first major innovation for the business was how do you take these things that were sold at Kirana stores out of the big tins and actually put them into packages. And that was considered a major innovation at the time because it did 2 things. A, it prevented spoilage of the ghee, and 2, it prevented pilferage of the ghee. So that was the major first innovation for the company in the, I would believe, late 40s, early 50s. In the 60s, we decided to move more broadly into consumer care. So we moved into personal products. And that was the business for the company for, I would say, the longest time, from the early 60s to perhaps the early 70s. And in the early 70s, we were looking to diversify again, and we got into the hydraulic cylinder business. So we make cylinders that go into dumpers, tractors, excavators, backhoe loaders, and it's a business we still continue with. And then in 1979, 1980, WIPRO was looking to diversify again, and we were evaluating two businesses from what I understand and how the story goes. One was the two-wheeler business, because the view was there was a rising middle class in India and people would buy two-wheelers, or getting into the technology business because IBM was leaving India at the time, and there was a view that there could be an opportunity in technology. And there are obviously very, very divergent choices. But for whatever reason, we made the decision to go into technology. And initially, we made our own hardware and made our own computers. We made products. And we also were, we tried to make our own software at the time, something called WDOS. For those of you who are familiar with MS-DOS, we tried to make something called WIPRO DOS, which was a major failure at the time. And so we were stuck with a large bunch of highly skilled people. And so what do you do? And we became an R&D lab for hire. And that was the story of the early 90s until the Y2K opportunity created this huge services surge for the Indian IT story. And then the story from the 1990s late 90s is well known, and sort of over the last 20 years, how the technology industry has moved. So it's been, we've been very blessed to be at the, be lucky and be at the right place at the right time. You can't script these things out there. You just have to be very, very lucky.
Thank you. What are your suggestions for India's education system to make youth more ready for employment, especially in the IT sector?
Yeah. So let me say two things. One is, I'm deeply worried about the fact that our children are not going back into schools, right? And our big learning from the work we do in the foundation has been the challenge of just not learning. And, many of our children are privileged and are sort of doing online schooling, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is the majority of India doesn't have access to online education. The reality is that somebody who was in the second standard, say before COVID, never went to school last year, but skipped third standard and is now in fourth standard, right, and still not gone back to school, actually doesn't remember what he or she learned as a second standard student. So probably has regressed greatly to be a first standard student who's now actually in the fourth standard, right? So there's a huge challenge in terms of learning, and it's incredibly, incredibly important that we find ways as quickly as possible to open up schools in a responsible manner, obviously vaccinating our teachers and finding the right mechanism for this to happen. And the reality in rural India anyways is most of the children in a village anyway engage as a part of, even in lockdown, right? So they're anyway connecting with themselves. So it's not like you're creating a unique distancing model by not having them go back to school. So I think going back to school is incredibly important more broadly from a learning standpoint, or I worry that, we can lose something here. The second is just in terms of skilling. And as I said to you, I think it's incredibly important that we focus on that as a mindset, as an individual, certainly in the IT industry. We obsess with that as a company where we're spending a lot of time and money getting our employees reskilled into new age technologies, getting them to actually sort of do proof of concept, sort of do internships, so to speak, within the organization in new age technologies. And then the efforts of the industry like NASSCOM. So NASSCOM has put together a fabulous initiative called the Future Skills Program, and now something called Future Skills Prime. And the objective is, how do you bring great content with certification, with recognition, with sort of managed programs to educate not only people who are already in the industry, the 4.5 million people I was talking about earlier, but also students graduating from college who want to be more employment ready. And that's a huge, huge focus. And I would strongly encourage folks to leverage these offerings, these capabilities. And it's a very, very strong tie-up with the government. So this is not happening by the industry alone and NASSCOM alone, but it's a very, very strong tie-up between NASSCOM, which is the industry association, working closely with the government of IT, with METI. So skill, and be obsessed with it.
Okay. What has been your journey at WIPRO prior to taking over as a chairman? If you could share with us some of the learning of this journey.
Yeah. So I've spent 14 years at WIPRO, a little over 14 years now at WIPRO. I started in middle management, as a middle manager in the company and grew my way through the organization, so I could really sort of get a sense of the underbelly of the company. My big learnings have come just in terms of my own philosophy through a lot of my father's principles and philosophies about learning. Some of those are, one is just working hard, right? There's no substitute to working hard. That's just the fundamentals. Two is being detail oriented, is understanding what's going on in the underbelly of the company without micromanaging, but understanding what's happening in the underbelly of the organization. So truly focused on that. Three is the ability to listen and learn from all levels of the company. You're never too big to learn. You're never too big to listen to people who are in the trenches of the organization. And I find that most of your learning comes from people who are in the trenches of the organization, because those are the folks that actually make the organization happen and the organization transact, right? And then a deep sense of just humility, right? The ability to acknowledge when you don't know something, the ability to acknowledge when you are wrong, the ability to surround yourself with people who are much better than you and have the humility to accept that they're much better than you. I think that's a lot of our philosophy in the company, certainly my philosophy, and I try and practice it, and hopefully some of it also rubs off in our leaders in the company as well. So that's what's helped me, and I have tried to practice that closely.
Thank you. I would like to invite Sunita to ask a few questions.
Rishad, I'm calling you Rishad. You said GG, so I will just be more friendly way. I'm asking you one question. WIPRO has helped India come as a leader in the IT sector. Do you think India is ready to take up such leadership role in IT industry globally?
Sunita ji, I would say that we already are, as an industry, a leader globally. Today, the technology industry in India, and it began with the IT and the BPO, or the IT and the BPM as we call it now, industry, that has led to this revolution over the last 20 odd years. And we began as a $1 billion industry in 1997, 98. We're a close to $200 billion industry today. We employ 4.5 million people directly. If you count the surround jobs we create as an industry, it would be enormous. So I would say we already are a leader. The reality is most global companies, most of the Fortune 500 companies today work with an Indian partner. Most of the Fortune 500 companies today have a presence through in-house centers in India, where they're not leveraging partners like us, but leveraging just the capability that exists in India. And as we look forward, I think the huge opportunity for India, and we talked about skilling, is to be the talent hub of the world, where we are a large source of talent for people everywhere and across the globe. So I'm hugely optimistic about the technology industry. I think what is now happening with the disruption in the startup space is also the next wave of what happens. I really believe that the new age companies that are coming out of India today can do the same thing that the IT services and the BPO companies did over the last 20 years, which is in terms of brand building for India, in terms of job creation for India, and in terms of wealth creation, right? And that's terrific. And you're seeing a lot of the excitement and noise around young companies, and also the openness in the mindset to experiment, to try things, to fail, but to get up and learn. So I'm hugely bullish for the technology industry most holistically. But I certainly think we've already arrived as a technology industry globally already.
Yeah, that's interesting. We are optimistic, and India is heading towards that.
Thanks.
Now we can open, Ujjwala ji, we can open the question for the floor.
I can see Tina Garg. Would you like to ask a question?
Oh, thank you. Hi, Rishad. I run an organization, and we get constant requests from the large organizations like Dell, Lenovo, GE Healthcare, and the others, all talking about talent branding today. I run an agency called Pink Lemonade. We get requests for talent branding, umpteen requests of this. And of course, there's also this the great resignation that America is talking about, with 41% of the people post COVID having put in their papers. I see India following a similar trend, and I can see most organizations grappling with this. Any insights on this, and what are large companies doing to manage this?
No, I would love your insights, Tina, because attrition certainly is a large problem for the industry. I would say it's one of the number one problems for the industry, right?
Yes.
And I think we've got to focus in great detail, both in terms of how do we ensure that we look after our people well, certainly through compensation as being one mean, but also provide people the opportunity to rotate well, to be able to experience different projects, to develop skills in new technologies, to really be there for them as people, right? We oftentimes tend to be very scaled and numbers oriented about this as opposed to individual oriented about this, and we've got to really pivot our philosophy to be much more caring about individuals. I say this inside the company that if I was a project manager in an account, I would spend 30, 40, 50% of my time with people, because that's my number one challenge today in terms of attrition. So really, I think focusing on people and spending time with them, I think, is important. The other thing that I'm hearing more and more, and I don't know whether you are, is, people as a part of this great resignation are also very focused on the philosophy of the organization. So what the organization stands for, the purpose of the organization,
yes.
How much do I resonate with this company, I think is also becoming incredibly important, right? So just because you cut me a fat check doesn't matter, but what I stand for also matters.
Absolutely. That's what we're going back with as solutions as well, but it is multi-pronged. It is a 360-degree approach to really managing it via managers, via the work from home strategies, staying in touch one-on-one with them, because that's what people have changed. Everyone's changed post COVID, and I think all of us are, and organizations are grappling with what is the new employee like? What are we as a people, and how is
I think we lost her.
We lost her. Rishad, I would like to ask you, how do you feel government is doing in terms of policies of being prepared for artificial intelligence and technology revolution?
Yeah. So Ujjwala, so two things. One, let me just answer that more holistically, because I feel the government is hugely supportive of the technology industry, and hugely supportive to ensure that we have the right policy framework, the right regulatory framework. I was in a discussion recently with Mr. Chandrasekhar, who's the Minister of State for our industry, for the technology industry, and all guns blazing in terms of support, working collaboratively with the industry to help us get to a $1 trillion digital economy as a part of our $5 trillion ambition for the country, right? So there's a huge amount of support and willingness to work collaboratively. And the one place where this has been demonstrated very tangibly and visibly is enabling this work from home, right? Most of our rules, actually, if you go back to March of 2020, were not enabled to people to work from home. And that happened overnight. And the reality is that we are now looking at making this permanent, right? So there's a tremendous amount of support from government to nurture the industry, to support the industry, and to help it grow and thrive.
Thank you for your insights.
Thanks.
I was hearing you in one of the conclave, the India conclave, India Today conclave, where you had just taken over as a chairman, and you were asked, how does it feel when you have to fit into the big shoes? And you replied, I stitched my own shoes. Could you just elaborate on that? I think that was a very impactful conversation that you had that day, and really something to learn from.
Yeah, so Ujjwala, one of our board members said this to me, during this process of transition and taking over, and he said, look, people will always make comparisons, and it will be exhausting. So you tell people when they tell you have big shoes to fill that, you can't fill big shoes because they're too big to fill, but you'll try and stitch your own, which is the best you can do. Because my philosophy in life has always been, you can be the best version of what you're capable of. You can't do more than you're capable of, right? And so the competition ultimately is against yourself and trying to do the best that you are capable of. it would be disappointing not to do the best you're capable of, but you can't do more than that. And so I don't let this get too much to my head. One tries to sort of stay focused and do the best one can do, and not worry too much about the noise around you.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to invite Smriti to ask a question.
Yeah, hi Rishad. Just asking you a question on a little lighter note. When Archana was introducing you, so she mentioned that you're a huge cricket enthusiast. So
Yes.
as a leader, how are you? Are you Captain Cool? Are you like Virat Kohli, a little hot-headed at times, or a Tendulkar?
Yeah.
What lies within?
Yeah, I'm not hot-headed. I'm one of those people who listens to people and tries to sort of get everybody's point of view and see how you can make the best decision collectively. I'm one of those people who believes in giving tremendous freedom to people to try things, experiment things, make mistakes, and then learn from them and move on. I'm not at all the kind of person that says, this is the path we're going down, it's the only path we can go down. That's not my style at all.
Thank you so much. Just a little insight into the real you. Thank you.
Thank you. Rishad, when you took over the reign of the company, what did you envision and where have you reached now?
Yeah, look, the attempt is how do we participate in this disruptive opportunity around technology and be among the leaders in the industry participating in this. And we've been through a tremendous change as a company over the last 14 months. We've got a new CEO who's doing an absolutely terrific job, and we've really energized the organization over the last 14 months. It's been an exciting journey for us. It's also been an exciting journey where we've benefited tremendously from just the momentum that's happening in the technology industry. The reality is there's just so much demand for technology. As I said earlier, every company becoming a technology company, a digital company. And so it's an exciting time to be in the industry. We feel very blessed, and we're just going to put our head down and do the best that we can do to participate and benefit in this journey. But the race is, the game is a long term. So the other advantage, Ujjwalaji, that we oftentimes think too, and we find that just the way we're organized and our ownership structure also enables this, is we don't make too many short-term decisions. We really think about decisions that will pay off for the company over the next 3 to 5 years. We're not being too myopic about what will benefit this quarter or the next quarter. We try and do right as much as we can by the organization in terms of thinking long-term as well. But it's an exciting time to be in the technology industry.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Jayanti to ask a question.
Hi, Rishad. It has been a wonderful opportunity to listen to you. My first question would be, how would you handle an unsatisfied customer and his criticism, especially during these COVID times?
Yeah. So Jayanti, I don't know if it would be different COVID time versus a non-COVID time. I mean, I think the most important thing is to really truly listen to your customers. Oftentimes you can get into a conversation where you feel the customer hasn't fully understand the challenge or the context or is not fully briefed. But I would say the most important thing is to listen to the customer, to truly understand what the pain point that they're feeling, and then work with them to resolve it. In our business, because we provide services, working in collaboration with our customers is incredibly important.
Sorry.
I think,
I would request everyone to mute yourself, please. Sorry about this.
So the customer is always right, and you've got to give the customer. You certainly shouldn't be afraid to push back with the customer and challenge things where you fundamentally disagree. But I think taking a very strong customer right and enabling and truly understanding their pain points, I think is incredibly important.
One more thing that always worries me is, like how secure and safe are the technologies and processes for iCloud services and data? How safe are we?
Yeah.
Because a lot of data nowadays is on the iCloud, and it's like anybody can reach out to it.
No, so Jayanti, I would just say, look, security has certainly become a very front and center conversation in this new digital first medium of engaging, right? The reality is, I will tell you, we as a company obsess with security, and most large companies, whether they're technology companies or otherwise, obsess with technology. And so ensuring that you are building talent for this to make sure that your environment, ensuring that you're not, that you're spending requisitely to make sure that your environment is safe is incredibly, incredibly important, right? Because the reality is that our environments are, can be vulnerable, and we've got to ensure that we provide the best possible version of security we can to the spaces, because I don't think the momentum is going to tremendously slow down. We just have to catch up and ensure that we are secure as this momentum picks up. So it's an important debate. It's a critical question, and we've got to obsess and focus on security, both in terms of talent and in terms of dollar investments.
Yeah, we are always worried about data going out, for everything. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rishad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question is, we've already gone through it, but what are the investments that are most necessary in an organization to create a technology environment that will allow a company to thrive to the next normal?
I'm sorry, you broke up, so I didn't hear the question. Can you just repeat that?
What investments are most necessary in an organization to create the technology environment that will allow a company to thrive to the next normal?
Ujjwala ji, I think, it depends on the context of a particular company. I see many new age companies today that are not necessarily tech companies, but in other industries driving a very strong tech first mindset, right? And the tech first mindset to me is very strong orientation around data, leveraging data, believing data as opposed to believing gut, working with data very smartly. But the other thing that I think which is a bit softer and equally important in organizations succeeding in being truly technology first companies, even if they are not technology companies, is just the change management and the change mindset, the mindset to think in a very, very different manner. And I oftentimes see a struggle with sort of the old age companies, and I don't mean by size, I mean in industries, to truly drive to this mindset of being data first, digital first, technology first in the way they think about their own organizations and also the way they engage with their customers.
Thank you so much. I would now request Jayanti, our Senior Vice President, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Ujjwala.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ujjwala. Namaskar. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to propose the vote of thanks for today's inspiring session. COVID-19 has certainly changed and impacted the Indian economy to a great extent. And like every major disruption, it is pushing the individual and the industry's boundaries. Now is the time more than ever to collectively deliberate on matters that impact India's economic recovery. On behalf of Flo and myself, I thank Mr. Rishad Premji, Chairman WIPRO, for addressing us on the role of tech industry on the India's recovery post-COVID. Your address has been an eye-opener, a lot of takeaways. Your thoughts on people management for being respectful, responsible, communicative, and connecting, and reaching out and trusting them are brilliant takeaways for any of us. Archana, thank you so much for moderating the session so brilliantly. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Very, very informative. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rishad. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rishad.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishad.
Rishad, you were brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.